All right, welcome back. After a slight delay, we're getting everyone set with audio and video. We got a live shot of Mr. Dan Geraci. We got Bryson here. We got Joe Anderson. Welcome back to the weekly Skytles Crypto and Space Call. How is everyone today? We made it.
Good now.
Joe, Bryce, good.
Uh, all good on my end. Keeping busy, so I missed last week.
Um, the thing we were looking at in terms of space markets moves yesterday was Global Star got a new CEO. Did you see that, Dan?
And their
Yep.
dollar stock popped.
Yeah, and it was up like 20 something percent. And we've listened to the interview last night on CNBC, but he's the former CEO of Qualcomm, and his dad was the founder of Qualcomm. Paul Jacobs, I think, is his name. And so he basically was saying just that the biggest value in Global Star is actually the amount of spectrum that they own across the world, and there's a lot of value there for the telcos, and I think the not just the carriers, but Apple, obviously, who's their biggest customer. And so, we started digging into Global Star and trying to figure out, what all was there. We didn't know that there was any there. we had kind of written it off, but with that new CEO, we're interested in it. So I don't know if Dan, if you know anything about them or Global Star or their spectrum.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're one of the granddaddies, and it is about how much spectrum you have, but it's also going to be about how much you're going to be able to put to good, profitable use.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're a good play, I think, as the whole industry is from a long-term standpoint. I don't think things are going to change overnight for anybody, but just in the SATCOM, the satellite communications segment, there's so much going on right now. And a lot of companies are positioning. There's a lot of new constellations being prepared. There's a lot of them really looking. You'll see a lot of contracts being signed with various, I would say, more remote regions of the planet where connectivity is being pursued by these more remote countries for their citizens who aren't connected, the O3B market, the other 3 billion as it's called. And that's a place where we at Freefall are playing very heavily in right now with SES, the largest player. And, it's going to be interesting because I think once those basic services are laid in at the foundation for a lot of these places, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Philippines, South America, India, etc. You're also seeing deals being done at the high end of the market where they're more profitable services can be employed. So there's going to be no shortage of business. The other issue that we got to keep in mind is that the U.S. government, and including the Defense Department, is a major buyer of that capacity right now. And so they're looking to the private sector to provide them with services, communication services for government-funded constellations, as well as using existing satellite constellations of these private companies for dedicated transmission of, Department of Defense or government data. So as this trend continues that we've always talked about, which is that the government is looking more and more to have the private sector be their backbone, there won't be any shortage of business for these companies. But make no mistake about it, this is a classic long-term steady growth play. And if there's a hockey stick in all of this from a market standpoint, it'll be towards the end of the decade when a lot of the space infrastructure we've always talked about is put in place, whether it's bigger constellations, whether it's LEO type platforms and stations and destinations, or if it's just lunar when you get out to the stuff that's being built around and on the moon. So, but the big players in SATCOM are going to be the ones who are going to be the utility companies for the new space economy. Those are the AT&Ts, if you will, of the old days. That's what's going to be at the backbone of all this data transmission.
Do you know why Apple picked Globalstar to do the iPhone SOS? I mean, has there been any chatter about what did Globalstar have to offer that Viasat or Inmarsat or somebody else did?
Well, I think if they, number one, if they have the capacity, that's one thing. The other thing is it's all about price. And so if I want to secure my anchor position as a SATCOM and I can lure Apple into a contract, then great. I mean, how many will I need like that? I want to be in the business. I want to be in the game.
Yeah.
So who can I support? And it's going to be a matter of big players like Apple wanting big players with big capacity like a Globalstar to be their partner. They don't want to go with some small shop that they don't even know can scale to meet their demand.
Yeah.
But having said that, everybody is going to be jockeying for position. I just wouldn't assume that a deal like that is kind of the end of the game. I think it's the first play. I think it's the first inning. I think that as things scale and demand gets larger, there's going to be a need for other players to maybe play different roles in these contracts. We're talking to a company, just had a meeting the other day with a company that's going to be doing direct-to-device and IoT, and they're building a whole new constellation, and they're trying to do it in a way where they can go after a much lower cost infrastructure, and that's what we're talking to them about. So you don't know what the future is going to hold, but if you're in the business now, you grab every contract you can get your hands on right now. It's about survival.
Right. I just wonder, like, if you're, I think Viasat, I mean, not Viasat, I think Globalstar has 48 satellites and 24 ground stations. If you were going to build out that infrastructure on your own today, I mean, how long are you talking? A year, 2 years? How long would it take to get that built?
I think the numbers we're hearing is people are saying, gee, 25, 26, we want to be a bigger capacity. I can tell you that the biggest issue may not be the satellite end. It's going to be the ground station end, or, what's known in the industry as either user terminals or gateways. And those types of hardware on the ground, they're going to be required to be in the hundreds at a minimum to support these constellations. Keep in mind that when you're in LEO, you need thousands of satellites to cover the planet. And you're going to need hundreds of ground stations to pick up that coverage. I think I've said this before on here. When you're in LEO, it's like standing up against the wall. Put your nose against the wall and then answer the question, how much of the wall can you see? Not a lot, just a very small piece. That's LEO. So you need thousands of satellites or thousands of eyes up against the wall to see the whole wall. When you get out to middle Earth orbit, you need 6 satellites to see the whole planet and cover the whole planet. And when you get out to geostationary, you only need 3. So the whole game is in LEO right now, and these guys need thousands of satellites, and they also need hundreds of ground stations to be able to cover the marketplace, at least 60 degrees north and south of the equator, which is where 90% of the population is.
What's stopping them from doing, from going further out right now so they can avoid having to build thousands of these satellites? Why can't they just do it right away?
Well, there's two things driving it, and it's a great question because SES obviously has their big mPOWER constellation at middle Earth orbit in MEO. There's 2 things. Latency is somewhat of an issue. It's a whopping 100 milliseconds longer to receive a signal from MEO than from LEO. So it's hardly noticeable, but there's a difference. And the other thing is the cost of moving your satellites all the way out to MEO is pretty big. It's a tons and tons of fuel of pushing those satellites up to a much higher orbit. And the launches have to get out there. So it's a bigger task for launchers, and it's a bigger cost for the satellite communication companies to put their stuff in middle Earth orbit. LEO is where the game is. It's easier, faster, cheaper. And that's what's, those are the variables that are driving this equation right now. I expect to see MEO a bit more congested over time, but the further out you go, you tend to see much bigger birds, much bigger satellites with much greater capacity that cost a lot more. Because if you're going to put a satellite that far out, you need to have a much bigger revenue story built around those satellites than you would for a, throwaway Starlink satellite, which, if one of them goes out tomorrow, no problem, just put another one up.
Right.
And
So I looked at the link that you put on there yesterday, Dan, with talking about all the mitigation and mediation and all the stuff out there. It seems like a great place that someone with your clout could call somebody and maybe get a SKTLs mention on that site. that we're trying to. That there is a company out there trying to help fund everybody else, which would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity. I think we need to do it from the ground up, from the company level up. And some of the companies that are starting to get really good funding and have gotten grants around debris mitigation. It's a tough one, because normally when I mention it to people, they kind of go, "Oh, really? There's somebody doing that?" Because naturally in their head, they don't equate the two. Yeah. Nobody on the person on the street won't equate crypto to debris removal. Not even if you gave them 100 guesses. I don't think they get there. The person
on the street doesn't even know about debris removal.
Yeah.
Anyway, let alone
right.
Somebody trying to, a crypto trying to help. They don't even get past the first step.
Well, it's interesting because I've got a couple thoughts on this actually. So it's accelerator season now. So the hyperspace accelerator that we've talked about in Albuquerque is going to be taking submissions for this new accelerator that they're doing, sponsored by the Space Force RCO, the Rapid Capabilities Office. And they're going to start taking submissions next week. That's the deadline for submissions. And a lot of it has to do with protecting assets in orbit, extending the life of those assets. How do you make sure that we can identify threats in orbit that are either, passive or active? In other words, how do you tell the difference between a piece of debris flying by and something being thrown at you by an adversary? Those are the three big categories for this new challenge that Space Force is putting up. So a bunch of us are submitting next week for that. And there's an opportunity to bring this up in those conversations. The other thing is, we've been accepted into the Seraphim Space Accelerator, which is kind of the gold standard for accelerators in our industry. And that's a 3-month accelerator program, and it starts officially. It starts this coming Thursday, but it kicks off. I'll be going over to London next Saturday, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday for a 1-week kickoff for the program. There's 2 sessions in London, 1 in Singapore, because they also have the accelerator participants in Singapore, and then 1 in San Francisco, because that's the 3rd location. And there'll be a lot of discussion about what's being done to support the industry. And I plan on mentioning, SKTLs in that environment, because that's probably one of the best places to get exposure, they're going to have a network of 100 investors globally of all shapes and sizes that are part of this process as we all go through it with our companies. So
very cool.
You have to have a targeted place. No one's going to pick it up in social media per se. You're not going to get the eyeballs and the ears that you want, frankly, that need to be there. So we've got to do this selectively, I think.
That makes sense. Cool.
So the other thing I would mention, well, we've got a couple minutes, is just that, we're still seeing the loads of contracts being issued and signed. And so while we have this backdrop of woe is me with the markets and what's going on, and, is anybody doing well in the space sector and is there capital? The more people I talk to, there's plenty of capital. It's just not going to be easy for anybody to get their hands on it because, whenever you have market uncertainty and turmoil, there's always a flight to quality. And quality is a relative term in the space economy. And so, we always talk about the fact that there hasn't been a successful exit in our industry. But at the end of the day, the companies that have good quality, that have good leadership, number one, that have proven product and technology, number two, and who are in discussions or seen to be highly desirable by key players, are the ones that are going to come out the other end of this pipeline in good shape. And so what you're seeing is a lot of investors are watching patiently, but are prepared to jump at a moment's notice to take positions in these companies. And for those of us out there in the midst of this, the old, gee, if I need a job. Well, if you had experience, I'd give you a job. Well, if I had a job, I'd have experience. That vicious circle we all went through when we were young. It's the same thing with capital. No one wants to be the first one to write a check. Everybody would love to be second, third, or last. And so it's finding those opportunities that can be that inflection point for a lot of these younger companies to flip that switch and change the conversation to where they're now getting a lot more in the way of attention, and attention in the form of capital that helps push them over the top. And so as I've had conversations with a lot of the startups I've known since they literally figured out how to incorporate several years ago, who are now winning big contracts, it was a long walk, and it will always be a long walk in this industry because there's nothing fast. This isn't .com. This is .space, and .space takes a lot longer to mature than .com. And I think a lot of early investors have figured that out because they thought, this is going to go literally to the moon overnight. And we're going to wash out a lot of short-sighted investors before we find an investment backbone for this industry that has the patience to see it through.
.com, it's a lot different than writing some code and trying some stuff out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't really hurt anybody. Space is a lot more, like we always say, a lot more difficult, and you have to take your time. And so that, just back to your point, it's just going to take longer.
And by the way, what has been the massive distraction in the last year? .ai, and for investors. And so that looks much more like .com to a lot of, hey, I want to do an overnight flip, than space. Space is kind of, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be here a long time. It's going to outlive every one of us. I need a return yesterday. And .ai has all the earmarks of .com. And so that has taken a lot of the attention away. It sucked the oxygen out of the room for venture capital. And so that doesn't help. So we're going to recalibrate and clearly define the right investor set. And frankly, that's the best thing for us long term. We don't need a bunch of flippers and jumpers who don't have the patience to see a technology work through the steps and then get a big contract and then get deployed in 2 or 3 years. That's the reality of our industry. There's nothing fast about it. There may be some 10-year overnight successes like there are in every industry, but that's what they're going to be. They're not going to be, hey, I have an idea on Monday and Friday I've sold it for $1 billion. It's not going to happen.
Who wants to get rich slowly, Dan? Want to get quick? That's
well, you know, as the famous investor Peter Lynch once said, among many things he said, it's not timing the market that makes you money; it's time in the market that makes you money. And you've got to be there. You got to be in it to win it. And if you start trying to time space, you're going to get your head and a few other body parts handed to you. So
yeah, I agree. Good stuff.
All right, that's all I've got.
Well, there you go.
Hot Houston, very hot and sunny Houston. That's right. In our drought.
No rain from the hurricane coming that way? No?
Not a drop. No, that took a hard right turn and is doing its damage in northern Florida, but as everybody knows, but we've been close to 30 days, over 100 in a row with not a drop of rain. So this is unheard of in hurricane season for Houston.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, everywhere's dry, I think. For the most part.
You want the right kind of rain, not a hurricane.
Southwest.
Yeah. Yeah. A nice steady soaking rain would be nice. Not the kind that, blows cars away and blows over houses. We don't need that.
Get you lots of moisture from the ocean, like feet. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Feet cover moisture. Yes.
The whole Florida Gulf Coast is about that from, I think, about Naples all the way up, just because of the way the wind and the trajectory of the hurricane, it just blew everything in. So they didn't even have to have a direct hit. It's just the surge.
No,
yeah, right.
It's that eastern side that's just whipping everything up as it hits the west coast. And I was talking to somebody in Tampa, St. Pete earlier on a call, and he said we have 50-mile-an-hour winds all night, but now the marina's a few blocks away, and you could see the surge just coming in over the top of everything and onto the streets.
Yep.
So
a lot of coastal areas are flooded.
And this poor guy is a transplanted Brit who they moved part of their business. Evona, the big search firm for space, they opened up a U.S. operation, and they're based down near Tampa, and they're getting a nice orientation to Florida weather right now. So,
about the worst couple of months to be there, I guess.
They think it's rainy in London. They haven't seen anything yet. So,
Cabana is not there on the beach today.
No, I am not. No. I'll be back there in a couple weeks or 3 weeks. Hopefully, if there's no hurricane coming, I'll just stay away. So But a friend of mine was actually supposed to be there this weekend. He canceled his trip. He's from DC. So next week, it'll be all right, depending upon where people go. So it'll be a big cleanup up there in the Big Bend. That's for sure.
Big time.
All right. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour. Any other thoughts or
no, I hope to see you next week, and the week after I'll be in London, so who knows if I'll be able to do it. I doubt it, but we'll see.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. We'll conclude.
Good to see everybody
this week. Yep. Good to see you.
See you next week.
Tune in next week, 4:00 Eastern.
Have a good holiday weekend. Take care.
You too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.